All right, so we have had the debates between Andrew Wilson and Candace Owens. I will say that actually turned out, I thought, in terms of the just the format, it turned out to me, I thought it was better than it turned out much better than I thought it would be. Um, if you've seen a lot of Andrew debates in the past, a lot of them get really messy and get really bad. They do become something of a dumpster fire pretty quick. In this one, there were moments where obviously, I mean, plenty of rules were broken. The idea was to have opening statements and then cross examination. That was basically, at least as far as I could tell, that was sort of the way the format was supposed to be. And largely, it did kind of go that way, I think. Again, there were obviously rules broken. Ones when this might be a good idea for me, a good point for me to talk about something that's escapes the minds of certain individuals. I'll just state what I believe here first. I don't think, and I'm going to make my case here. I do not see how anybody, if thinking objectively, can say that Candace won that debate. It's um, just, and here's the thing. How do I know? Well, when I became a Christian, I said this in my last video. When I first became a Christian, I was very interested in truth. Where do I go? There's a lot of Christians in the Christian world and in Christendom who say different things. What do I believe? Um, and so I spent a lot of time listening to formal debates on YouTube. Um, and when I talk about formal debates, I'm not talking about the Piers Morgan appearances. I'm not talking about what you typically see on YouTube these days, where people go on these webcasts and they just scream at each other back and forth. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about, which is typically tends to be Andrew Wilson's interactions. What I'm talking about is, in a formal debate, you have your moderator, you have two positions being held. Sometimes you have two guys on each side, maybe more, but typically it's just one on one. One side is presenting the positive argumentation, the other one's presenting the negative argumentation, usually again. And the one side that's trying to prove the thesis goes first. And what they do is they will start with their opening statements. And then sometimes opening statements are just 10 minutes, some of them are 20. I've even listened to some that were like 30-minute long opening statements. And then the other side does their opening statements. And then after they both do their opening statements, they go into rebuttals. Both sides do the rebuttals one at a time. And during the rebuttals, there are no interruptions. They are allowed to just they get to rebut the opening statements of the other side. And then they go into cross examinations. And that's where the debate really gets interesting. That's where I really start to tune in. Because that's where all the rhetoric of a really nicely well put together opening statement really gets put to the test. And all the wheels could start falling off. And then you have the cross examinations. Both sides get to do it. One side cross examines the other one. And usually the rules are, the one who's doing the cross-examination gets to ask the questions. The one who's being cross-examined does not get to ask questions unless they need clarification on the question that was asked of them. That's usually the only exceptions. Otherwise, they are forbidden from asking any questions or trying to make accusatory questions towards the cross-examiner, because they're not the ones allowed to do that. And the moderator will step in and say, basically say foul. You're not allowed to do that. No, you're the one who's answering questions, and they have to say, oh, I'm sorry. That's how strict these debates are, to keep it very organized. That kind of stuff. The audience isn't even supposed to. There's usually an audience there, but they're usually not even supposed to applaud until the very end. I've been in one of these debates, not like participated in the debate, but I've been in an audience in one of these debates. You're supposed to be really quiet and listen. There are no applause. Your side makes a really good point. You're not supposed to go, oh yeah. You're not allowed to do that stuff. not till the very end. And then you have closing statements, and typically that's how it goes. That's a formal debate, okay? That's what I have grown up used to. Now, in a debate, in that context, which I think this one did a fairly okay job at following that, you have both sides must state their position, okay? They have to state their position. Typically, once again, it's one side presents a positive argumentation, the other side presents a negative argumentation. That is to say, the positive is the one who's trying to prove the thesis. The negative is the one who's trying to disprove the thesis. So, all that to basically say, what was Candace's thesis? Well, essentially, Candace's thesis was that there is overwhelming evidence that Tyler Robinson is a patsy, a cover-up for a conspiracy by, I don't know if she said directly Israel, but she clearly implies it's Israel, Israeli agents to kill Charlie Kirk. That's Candace's theory, okay? That is her thesis, and her thesis is, I can prove it. So when you go into the debate, you have to stick to that. You are required to defend and assert that thesis. Now, on the flip side, Andrew Wilson's thesis was, and it's pretty simple actually, Andrew Wilson's thesis was, the evidence is not overwhelming. The evidence is overwhelming that Tyler Robinson killed Charlie Kirk, and it is. It just is. And that his claim is that you like Candace Owens is making conjecture, did a Candace Owens there for a moment, without any actual evidence to do it. In other words, Candace is, his argument is that he can demonstrate that Candace's position, negatively, he can demonstrate Candace's position relies on conjecture. It relies on leaps and gaps, where she goes from an anomaly here and then makes a conclusion from that out of nowhere without any sufficient evidence to go there, without considering plausible alternatives that are simpler explanations with the evidence. And for himself, he's just following where the evidence goes. The evidence is pointing towards Tyler Robinson. Clearly. It's pretty much a done deal at this point. Now, does that mean that there is no further evidence of maybe somebody else involved? No. That doesn't mean that. There could very well be other people involved. But as Graham Allen said, you need to first and foremost put away the shooter himself. After you put him away, then you can start looking into who else might have been in on it. But do what can be clearly done first, and then go on to the other stuff. So, looking back at Candace's thesis, that she can provide sufficient evidence that she is confident in that Turning Point USA is complicit, or that that Tyler Robinson is a patsy for a bigger plot to murder Charlie Kirk. You must move on after watching that whole thing to ask the question, did she prove that? She did not. Not even close. She repeatedly walked back claims. She refused to allow herself to be held to claims. Andrew Wilson just would straight up ask her, do you believe such and such? And then Candace would just be like, I am not going to make a statement on that because of legal reasons, blah, 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 blah. Like, just wouldn't commit. She's not even committing to her actual thesis, after saying she can provide sufficient evidence for her thesis, but she won't even commit to it. Numerous times in the discussion, she misrepresents Andrew Wilson's position. I've encountered her own cultists who say that Andrew Wilson was being incredibly unfair and double standard because, he was saying she's not allowed to make conjecture, inferences or whatever, but yet he can. And it's like Andrew said several times he doesn't have a problem with you asking questions. He doesn't have a problem with you making possible suggestions. He has a problem with you making claims based off of conjecture that you just can't prove, that you have no basis for, and that you have not provided or searched for alternative explanations for. And that's what he has a problem with. That right there is the issue. That's the whole point. He says in the debate to her, he says, if all you were doing, Candace, was genuinely asking questions and just going, this seems a little bit odd, but I don't really know what to make of it, so it is what it is. That's all we know for now. He told her we wouldn't even be having this discussion. But it's the fact that you go even farther in saying Erica is complicit in it. By the way, Candace is caught just red-handed saying Erica is complicit. I mean, she said it. Everybody knows she said it. Her own people know she said it. Well, why would her people be walking around saying Erica is evil and she killed her husband? Where are they getting that information from? Inquiring minds want to know. Inquiring minds want to know. But apparently, according to Candace, in this debate, she never said that. That's not what she meant. Now, of course, Andrew kept asking her. I don't think she really gave him a proper answer. Well, then, what is she complicit in? Why did you say she's complicit? What in? If you're not talking about the murder of Charlie, what are we talking about here? And I mean, maybe I missed it, but I didn't watch the whole debate. I watched a good chunk of it. But there were parts where, because I was at work, I couldn't keep watching, so I had to, I'm not going to go back and watch the whole thing again. But, so as far as I can tell, she just tried to weasel her way out of what she was clearly saying in that clip. And we all know what she was saying in that clip because, again, all of her cult following are making the conclusions for her. And how often does Candace get on her show and say, hey guys, there's these claims going around that I'm blaming Erica Kirk for her husband's murder. That needs to stop. That's not what I was saying, guys. You need to stop that. Nope, she's never done that. I mean, I think what she does is she will go on her when she's starting to get pressured enough, she'll go on to say, hey, I didn't say these things. These guys said that. She'll throw her people under the bus and say, I didn't say that. They're the ones who are saying it. But for the most part, she doesn't really try to correct that. She just kind of allows these ideas to fester and doesn't seem to do anything about it. She doesn't seem very concerned about these rumors spreading about Erica Kirk. And she apparently, in this debate, seems to not think that Erica Kirk actually did it. Or that she was a part of it. Well, then we asked the question, what was the whole point of her little mini documentary series, which she never even finished, by the way? Again, I find the evidence of somebody who is flying by the seat of their pants probably very emotionally unstable. I am not a woman. I've never been pregnant before. I can never be pregnant because I'm a guy. But Candace has said over and over and over again, she is always pregnant. So I don't know if that means I know that women can get pretty emotional during pregnancy. So if she's constantly pregnant, I don't know what emotional toll that takes on her, especially being in the public light. So she could be just an incredibly emotional person and is just flying by the seat of her pants again. And she is just not making any real sense. And she's just like, we're going to do this. And they're like, you know what? We're going to go do this now. Nope. Now we're going to do this. And just like, instead of like, taking it easy for a while. I think that could be a plausible thing of what's actually going on in Candace's brain. That she is just emotionally just a wreck. She was very emotional in the debate, by the way. She's at the beginning, she was like really like trying to hound on Andrew, talking very fast, and you can tell she was. It's just there's like almost shakiness in her voice. Like you can kind of just tell there's a little bit of nervousness or just high emotions that she's trying to keep down. And Wilson looked pretty calm. throughout the whole thing. He looked pretty calm, even when she was getting really worked up. She had some moments where she was just absolutely like melting down. Again, getting very emotional. And I said this to my friends. I'm just gonna say it. I don't mean this in any offense, but just talking like an emotionally pregnant woman. That's how she was behaving so much. I remember at one point when Andrew's he's pushing her on her evidence. Candace says something about the truck that they used to take Charlie to the hospital. How apparently it got returned to its owner or whatever, really fast. She said like that thing should have just been kept in evidence or whatever. And like I'm listening to this and I'm going, but why? Why should it? Why? What do they do with that? Like, what do you do with a truck that's in evidence? Are you gonna roll that truck into the courthouse to use? No, what they usually do is when there's a car involved, they'll take the pictures, they'll get all the samples and everything like that. That's it. Because they can't actually take the thing into the courthouse. I mean, the courtroom. It's not an artifact in and of itself. That's like it's not like an artifact of like a weapon that you would take into the court. You typically will do all the stuff that you need to do, and then you're done with it. So there's nothing unusual about that. And Candace wants to pretend like it is. I mean, I would be interested to find out how often you can look up murder cases where, they have a car that's involved in a murder or in a crime, and they got the stuff they needed from the car, and within a couple of days, they're done with it. I wonder how many of those you can find. I bet you can find a lot, which just proves that's not really all that unusual. But just even with that aside, the simple fact that there is this car that is like they're done with it and then they just get rid of it really fast, whatever. They put concrete slabs over the area where Charlie Kirk was killed. That is not. I don't know how to even say it without I don't know. Just that's not proof. There's nothing in that implies Israel must have done it. And when they used Egyptian planes and they have Israeli agents here and they blew up a microphone, that is not proof at all. That is nowhere near it at all. It is just I don't know. Maybe the reason why they did that is because there's probably blood stained all in the ground, and they just didn't want that because it's like when if a murder happens in your home. Maybe you would just get rid of the room, or maybe you would just completely change the room because you just don't want the memories of that, the traumatic memories of that to linger or something like that, maybe. It's not uncommon at all to do these kinds of things. And that's the other thing I wanted to kind of talk about here. Because the candy cult, it seems like we're going to have to just teach these people basic logic. Just the way things generally work. Contrary to what they think, they do have a lot of things to prove. They think they don't. They do. When you make claims like, Israel killed Charlie Kirk, or the deep state killed Charlie Kirk, the government killed Charlie Kirk, when you are making those claims, and those are claims, you must provide sufficient evidence. Simply trying to sow doubt in the official narrative, that is not evidence. So when it comes to evidence for something, you have to have the positive and the negative. The negative is you're trying to disprove something, which in this case would be to disprove the narrative itself, okay? The official narrative. That's what you got to do. All right, fine. You sow enough discord in that, but you still need to make a positive presentation. What is your explanation for all this? Because if you're going to say the government did it, that is a positive claim. And then you must be able to positively prove that. And once again, you have to ask Candace, objectively, if you're going to be objective, you have to ask, did she do that? She did not. And I know that's true because I've been running around on social media like all day since the debate, and I'm just asking the candy cult one little question. Can you provide any sufficient evidence that Candace proved her initial thesis? And the best answer I get is, well, Andrew didn't prove his. He didn't prove his thesis. And I'm like, first of all, didn't answer my question. Secondly, Andrew's thesis was simply, the evidence points to Tyler Robinson, and it does. It does. It just does. All the evidence that you bring together, it all points to Tyler Robinson. There's just no way to doubt that at this point. Unless you get some kind of crazy crack in the case of something new that comes along and totally changes everything. I doubt you're going to find that at this point. I want to use an example here. I used this in my last video briefly, but I'm going to use it here again and maybe elaborate a little bit more. Custer's last stand. All right, so bear with me here. Because I'm again going to have to just teach the candy colts if they watch stuff like this, even if they get this far, which they probably won't. Some basic logic, okay? In Custer's last stand, if you don't know the story, Custer, he's well known back in his day in the late 1800s, during the Civil War, and then he made his name in the Civil War, and then was sent after the Sitting Bull and his Lakota Native Americans. I keep always wanting to say Indians, but they were Native Americans. He and his 7th Cavalry sent to find him. And when Custer when he finds them, he's quick because he thinks, he's got to do it now. And so what he does is he sends the 7th Cavalry in of only about, I think, 700-ish guys, I think, total. Not a lot, especially compared to what they were up against, somewhere upwards of like 2,000 Native Americans. From different tribes, all coming together. And he didn't know that. He had no idea just how big this number was. And he just thought, no matter what it is, we can take them on because, they're all a bunch of savages. So what he does is he splits his guys up, which is already bad enough. He has one group of guys go straight at the Native Americans. That's Reno's group, okay? Some are like 80 guys, I think. Maybe 100, something like that. And they go, their job is to charge in after the Native Americans. Meanwhile, Custer himself, he's gonna go up on these bluffs and he's gonna go around the right and try to hook around the right. And then he sends off Benteen and his guys off to the left. Now, Reno gets routed because he starts to realize exactly what he's up against. He panics, and instead of charging in, he has his guys stop and start to try and engage the Native Americans in like a skirmish line, and that is a huge mistake because now the Native Americans are able to kind of consolidate and charge him and his men and overwhelm them and push Reno back, and he goes back to the fort, ends up back up on top of the hill, far south, basically. Far away from Custer. Custer's way off north now. And then the next thing, after a couple of hours, they don't see Custer anymore. They just hear a bunch of gunfire happening way off in the north over these hills. They don't see it, but they can hear it. They can hear a lot of gunfire. Around 5 o'clock, it stops. Around that time period, they're still continually being sort of lightly attacked by Native Americans, but they don't ever really charge them, which is a mystery in and of itself, because if they did charge them, they would have been wiped out. But the natives, for whatever reason, they didn't charge Reno on what's now called Reno Hill. And then, but the natives, so Reno and his guys with Benteen, because Benteen eventually comes back to Reno, and they kind of just sit there, don't do anything. They would just wait for Custer to come back, and Custer never comes back. Night falls. Next day, still getting kind of lightly attacked by the Native Americans, but eventually the Native Americans just move on. They go south towards the Bighorn Mountains. And then after that, basically they're clear and they start to move up north where they find Custer and his men. They're all dead. They're all dead. Now, that is what's considered Custer's last stand. But was it the last stand? We don't really know for sure. We don't know exactly what happened. all we know is the things that I just told you. Those are the basic facts of what we know. Okay, so that is the surface level information that we have. What we don't know is who killed Custer himself. There is speculation that Custer actually killed himself because he was found with a gunshot wound to the head and then one to the chest. And he also had a cut on his leg and a cut on his thigh, which is a Lakota tradition of course, sort of like trophy kills, you know. They'll cut the thighs of their victims. So, you know, do we know for sure? We don't know for sure. We only have the facts that I gave you. Now, here's the thing. Given all of that, let's say someone comes along and starts to say, well, you know, actually, Custer was betrayed by his men, and he was allowed to be killed by his men, Reno and Benteen. And you might say, well, how do you know that? Well, because they never got along, which is true. They didn't. They didn't get along very well. The 7th Cavalry was kind of a mess. So there's that. You know, and then people will point to the fact that, well, you know, Custer, you know, the natives knew who Custer was. They knew that this guy had a reputation for terrorizing Native Americans. And they would have absolutely wanted his scalp. They would have wanted his scalp. And Custer's not difficult to point out because he usually has that long, wavy hair and his big old hat. And yet Custer wasn't scalped when they found him. He actually wasn't particularly mutilated like the rest of his guys were. He was kind of just had 2 gunshot wounds. He had an arrow in his private area, and then he had a slash across his thigh. He was also stripped naked. You know, they took his clothes, you know, but that's about it. And so you guys say, I think he was betrayed by his men and he was murdered by his own guys. And or someone else might come along and say, I think Bigfoot did it. I think Bigfoot actually killed him. Actually, I think aliens got him, you know. And then what they'll do is, you know, if you ask them, well, what's your proof of that? They don't actually have the proof. What they will do is they try to sow doubt by looking at the oddities I just mentioned to you, the little factors here and there, some of the strange things about Custer and the 7th Cavalry, and then, you know, Custer's own death itself, how it's unusual. The natives would have mutilated him because they did it. They do it to everybody, right? But they didn't do it to him. So what they do is they sow doubt in the official narrative, but they don't actually have any positive argumentation. Did you see a spaceship? No. Is there any evidence of plasma beams or whatever it is that aliens would use? Bigfoot's, does Bigfoot usually travel out in the open plains? Not from what I know. You know, there's no evidence of that. And they'll say things like, you know, look, I'm just asking questions. When you push them on that stuff, I'm just asking questions. You know, I'm not saying anything serious, but they'll still imply these things. That is clearly this, and their only proof is, their only way they can ever make anything work is by just sowing doubt in the official narrative. That's the only way they can make it work. And then if they can get you on that, then they can start trying to sell you on a different idea. Which is kind of funny because, you know, there's this creature back in a long time ago. It's called the serpent. Kind of did the same thing to Eve. Did God really say? And started changing what God actually said and started convoluting the clear command. You know, God didn't actually say that, you know, and just sort of just obfuscating, and there you go. And the next thing you know, we're fallen. There's the fall, and the rest is history. But it's just something to think about. But that's what they do. But here's the thing. I have my theory of what happened to Custer, okay? I think what happened was Custer sends Reno down the center, basically, because I think his plan was he's going to go around the right, up the hill. He's going to come down from the ford, and then as Reno's pushing the natives, his job is to cause panic. He's not necessarily to kill a lot of them, but to cause panic so they start to run. and they would start to flee, and especially the women and children are going to run away from Reno's attack. Custer's going to come down and grab them as they're running away, because he did it before. He would grab, he would round up women and children to make the warriors surrender. And I think that's what his plan was going to be. So as Reno is charging and causing panic, they're running away, they're going to run straight into Custer coming around from the north. If any of them try to escape off to the left, in other words, west, there's Benteen waiting for them, because that's his job. I think that's what the plan was. Now I say I think because there's no official report that that was actually the plan. But I think you can look at that and go, that was probably what it was, based on history of Custer's tactics and all that stuff. But you can't say for sure, okay? Because we don't have any information that confirms it. We just don't have it. Now, what actually happened? I think what happened was, because Reno was routed, instead of him just pushing forward into the Native American village, instead he gets routed and he runs backwards. Now the Native American warriors are able to recuperate. So then when Custer's coming down from the north, expecting to meet Reno and possibly a lot of the women and children, he's instead confronted by a beehive, basically, that is very pissed off and overwhelmed by the Native American warriors, and his men are chased back across the ford. And I think this reason why this is plausible is because if you go to the Little Bighorn battlefield site today, it's basically a big old preservation now. They have little makeshift graveyards for where every soldier fell. And the reason why they initially did this was because at that time they didn't have the means to bring their remains back home, so they just buried them in shallow graves where they were at. Eventually they dug them up and they put them in proper graves and everything like that. I think a mass grave, but anyways. So today they have markers where each man fell. Some men are named, some of them they don't know the name of these guys. They just know that a guy was found here. They don't really know who he was. And there you go. But they have the markers where these guys fell. And there's a lot of them today, if you go there, that trace from the ford that go up to Custer's Last Stand Hill, where Custer eventually, his own, with the rest of his men are found. Like little tombstones, basically. And you can find the one that says this is where Custer fell. So I think the evidence clearly suggests that's what the plan was. It went horribly wrong, and Custer gets routed himself because Reno got routed. He's chased back up, surrounded, and killed. Lasts maybe a couple hours, based on the testimony of the gunfire, lasting such and such, and then he's gone. Now, here's the thing. Once again, I don't have proof that that is what happened. Nobody does, because everybody's dead. Everybody in Custer's men are dead. You have the testimony of the Native Americans who participated in the battle themselves, but the Native Americans are known to embellish. So how much of their testimony can you trust? It's hard to say. So you don't know for sure. So I'm not going to sit here and say, you know what, I think it was Bigfoot. I think it was this strange government conspiracy. I'm not going to say things like that because I have nothing that would really push me in that direction. It's just a situation in which the whole thing went foobar because I shouldn't put too much on Benteen. Custer's at fault in many ways because he didn't reconnoiter. He didn't do any of that stuff. He just was like, we can do this, we got this, and totally underestimated what he was actually up against and got overwhelmed and killed. But that's all we know. And the simple point is, don't make claims beyond what you know. For this case, what information do we have that implicates Israel, Erica, any of these other entities? There is nothing. There is just no evidence. I just don't know how, that is easy to grasp. How is that so hard to get, that there's just no evidence that is the case? Just go with what evidence we have until new evidence comes along. It's seriously, it's just that simple. It is really that simple. Well, there's all these irregularities. The Custer thing, remember what I talked about? I forgot to mention this. Why wasn't Custer scalped? You know, why? Seems strange, Chase. Don't you think that that means there's possibly a conspiracy to betray him? Well, so it does seem strange, but remember what I said. You need to make sure you've exhausted all possible alternative explanations before you jump down this conspiracy rabbit hole. Is there another explanation for why Custer wasn't scalped? Well, here's the thing. When you scalp somebody, it's a lot easier to do it when you can, like, I could get, if I were alive that time, they'd be looking for me, because this guy's got a good head of hair, and just grab that hair and just start to, and there you go. So I would be a prime target. Custer, of course, you see his pictures, he has long hair. Except the problem is when he went to the Battle of the Little Bighorn, he was actually losing a lot of his hair. His hair was thinning out, he was going bald, and I believe he was actually totally shaven for that battle. And that also explains why, another reason why he wasn't scalped, because again, usually they would want to scalp, of all people, Custer. If they got Custer's scalp, boy, would that have been an absolute morale booster for the Native Americans. We got this guy. We got his scalp, man. But it doesn't seem like they even recognized him because he was bald in the battle. Most likely bald. I believe he was legitimately bald. I think you can probably fact check that, looked it up, that he didn't have his hair. And I'm pretty sure he still had his handlebar mustache thing, but otherwise he didn't have his big old lock of hair and everything like that. So they probably didn't even recognize him because he has a certain profile that they know him about him, which he wasn't fitting. And so they just probably, apart from that, the simple fact that the dude is bald, it's kind of probably a little bit harder to scalp somebody with that baldness. And that was it. So when you start to consider little things like that, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, okay. And I just wish people would just be humble enough to just say, because that's what happened with me. You know, I was starting to get into conspiracy theories about Charlie Kirk, and then I started seeing alternative explanations for a lot of these things, and I was just like the strange plane activity I mentioned in my last video, which I forgot to elaborate on, about a plane coming back down to Arizona or something like that after Charlie Kirk was killed. How it acted funny, apparently, and then it was like, it actually turns out that's actually not very unusual activity at all. That's actually fairly normal. And so I looked it up, and I was like, okay, well, nothing weird about that then. Just like with all these other supposed anomalies, there's always a plausible alternative explanation. The bullet, turns out, soft shell bullets. And there are actual legitimate ballistics experts who, I did a Candace again, who've commented on this, and at least for me, I correct it, by the way. Candace she does it numerous times, misspeaks words, and doesn't seem to realize she's doing it. But anyways, ballistic experts say, without, like, they're like, dude, I do this stuff for a living. I know how these bullets work. That is not unusual for that soft shell bullet to do that, especially, you know, in the neck. The neck actually is pretty thick. There's a lot going on in the neck. It's not unusual that thing would shatter before it blew his head clean off. So now, and of course, in that situation, when they were talking about the bullet, Candace wants to use certain sources. You know, Rob O'Neill, who is, by the way, Rob O'Neill has already been proven to be a bit of a fake, a bit of a fraud. So, you know, that's your source. But she goes with that, but seems to completely ignore other sources, very reputable sources, ballistics experts. That is really hard to say, though, by the way. Ballistics experts. Say that 3 times fast. Ignores them and goes with the Rob O'Neill thing. Now, I understand, look, some sources are going to contradict each other, but that's where, again, you have to do the due diligence and do the proper investigation. You can't just ignore one and affirm the other without any basis to do it. That's not how it works. Why accept Rob O'Neill and not these guys? Well, Rob O'Neill was a soldier. Well, so was that guy. And maybe that guy wasn't, but he knows bullets. He makes bullets. He's a bullet expert. He's a ballistics expert. I almost missed it there. So why not take his testimony? Maybe it's because it's not affirming your particular narrative. So, that's that. So I just want to. I think I've made my point here. Again, I've asked the Candy cult numerous times. Where can you prove to me that Candace proved her thesis? She didn't. She didn't. At all. Well, Andrew didn't. I asked you a question. I'd be happy to answer yours. Did Andrew prove his? Yes, he did. He said Andrew's thesis was the overwhelming evidence points to Tyler Robinson, and it does. It does. It just does. But for Candace, all she was able to do was try to sow doubt in the narrative, which she did a bit of a mediocre job on that. Look, I'm not going to say she completely floundered. There were moments where she just absolutely butchered herself. Really was not good. The part where she says that Erica is implicit in Charlie's death and tried to walk it back and try to restate, what she was actually. I was next talking about his death. It's like, well, what the heck were you talking about then? What does that mean when you say she's complicit? Complicit in what? Complicit in what? And as far as I can tell, she didn't really provide an answer for that. And the conclusion of her own audience implies we all know what she was talking about. But she never was able to prove that any of her. The only thing she could really do was try to sow doubt. And I like I said, I will grant that she did. If the best thing that Candace did in the debate was sow a certain amount of doubt. I almost said enough, but I don't think it was enough. A certain amount of doubt in the official narrative to try and convince people of hers. That's not what she was supposed to do. That is partially what she was supposed to do, because again, your job is to, when you're defending that thesis that there's overwhelming evidence that Tyler is a patsy, basically. You have to, typically what you would do is you would first sow doubt in the official narrative and then move on to, here's the better explanation that he was a patsy and here's the proof for it. But she didn't do any of that. She just tried to sow doubt in the official narrative, and that was it. And then just say, well, because I've basically shown that there's weirdness and irregularities here, therefore this theory. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works. First of all, how do we know that your doubt claims are valid themselves? And secondly, how do they lead to? And this is what Andrew kept asking her. How do you go from that to Israel did it, Egypt was part of it, the government did it, whatever, whoever's the main bad guy, whatever. How do you get there? You can't get there. That was the point. That was Andrew's entire argument, that she can't actually do it, and she didn't do it. That's why objectively she lost that debate. Again, you can have all the ladies, all the women, and the male women come around and try to, say no. But they can say it all they want. Look, I'm just telling you right now, objectively, as someone who has and knows how formal debates work, there's just, if you just look at the actual thesis of both sides, it's just not in dispute that Candace floundered that. And repeatedly misrepresented. Usually when you're misrepresenting, that's usually an indicator that you are not telling the truth. You can't actually properly and honestly represent your side. Now, I may have misrepresented in some ways in this video here. I'm happy to be corrected. I tried my best, All right, so I just need to say this one thing. I mentioned it in my last video, but I think it's worth saying again. This whole debate, the fact that this entire thing happened is truly a travesty. It really, really is. And it once again leads me to think about things. With the downfall of legacy media, what has taken its place? And I just sometimes wonder, when I look at people who have podcasts today, like Candace Owens, I want to make sure it's clear here. I am not saying, by the way, that we should make laws to ban people from having podcasts until they meet a certain criteria. I'm not saying that at all. I am genuinely glad that legacy media no longer has a monopoly on the information. Absolutely. But with that always comes the question, what has taken its place? And I just wonder if what has taken its place is a worse monster than legacy media itself. Now there's no reins at all. I mean, anybody, any schmuck who just like me can just have a podcast and get a lot of thousands and thousands of followers and become an influencer without any credentials, none of that stuff. And in fact, that's encouraged in our society now. Now with the candy cults, they actually take pride in the idea that they are so against the establishment. They refuse to listen to anything that comes from the institutions because they're all corrupt. Not realizing that even though the institutions do not monopolize information anymore, they're still a huge part of the information you get. But I digress at that point. But I just kind of think maybe legacy media did have a point, nevertheless, that if you guys make this to where there are no reins, there are no, rules you got to follow, criteria you have to meet in order to become a credible journalist and speaker and influencer on cultural and political issues. If you just remove all of that so that just anybody who's just really good at marketing themselves can then gain an audience, you're going to end up with so many different kinds of people. So much information is going to be out there. We're not going to be able to make heads or tails of any of it. You're going to have situations where we have today, debates where one side says, oh yeah, we totally crushed them. The other side says, we totally crushed them. And there's there is no standard anymore. It's a free-for-all. It is just a free-for-all. Nobody's actually thinking about structured debate. It's just my zings versus your zings, and my hot takes versus your hot takes, and who can get the biggest click than the other one. And that's basically it. We all are balkanized. We're all just getting in our little groups and groupthink. And that's it. And it's just creating a more hostile and volatile environment. Whereas once again, even though legacy media is certainly, look, I don't miss it, that's for sure. But I still have to just say, at least in legacy media, there was some form of order, there was some standard that you were expected to follow. And that's just gone now. It's just totally gone. Now it's just all about who can make the coolest clicks, the coolest little clip, and make it sound cool. Not whether it's actually coherent. Nobody really researches what claims are made these days. They just kind of I like that, and so I'm going to stick with it, and that's it. That's how we've gotten to where we are, to this debate that happened between Andrew Wilson and Candace Owens. That's how we got here. A bunch of people who don't understand what actual journalism is, because Candace herself doesn't even understand it, who don't understand what evidence is, what claims are, conjecture. They don't understand any of that stuff, and or even consistency in and of itself, being consistent. Don't care about any of that stuff. They are in this like a team, one team versus the other, and it doesn't matter what our team does, as long as they're winning. In our books, at least. And I just think, maybe legacy media had a point. Maybe we can't actually do this. We can't actually handle being the real gatekeepers of what is good media. That we're just too stupid. The masses really are dumb and stupid, and just can't actually deal with this. Now, I say, well, Chase, what are you suggesting we do in its place? I don't really know yet. I'll be honest with you. I have a few ideas. Maybe I'll talk about those ideas at some point. I'm thinking about writing an article about it, but I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what the solution is, because obviously I don't want to go too far into the direction of too much plurality and therefore anarchy, but I also don't want to go too far into the legacy media monopolizing everything. I don't want to go back to that either. There's got to be some kind of middle ground compromise of some kind, but I don't know what that is, because I know a lot of people talk about holding accountability, but we clearly don't do that. So we clearly still are cheerleading our side, not holding them accountable. I mean, look, even if you try to say Candace, I think, came out on top of that in that debate, if you actually say, oh, she whooped Andrew Wilson, you're just not thinking at all. Like, your standard, the sky is green in your world. The up is down in your world. That is somebody who is just not seriously thinking logically about this. It's just, any coherent thinker can't seriously think Candace just whooped on Andrew Wilson. Like that no way. That did not happen. Like, I don't know what you watched. Again, just projecting your brain and your interpretations onto it, because you're just so completely obsessed with Candace Owens. She's just this amazing person, just the most incredible person in the world. She would never lie, even though, the woman has quite a track record. If people, just like in the cults, if you can get the cults, the Christian cults, the sub-Christian cults, LDS, Jehovah's Witnesses, that kind of stuff, if you can get them to step outside of their perspective and their idolization of their organizations and see the actual history of those organizations, that is definitely one thing. But it's hard to get them to do that, to step outside of that. And it's the same thing with the Candace cults. If you can get them to step outside and actually examine Candace Owens objectively in her history, maybe you got something. But it's just hard to get them to do that. So, anyways, those are my thoughts on the whole thing. I gotta go. Soli Deo Gloria. God bless. Bye.